The Elisa was established by 5 priests and 4 priestesses of a larger temple grouping in Atlantis. This new sect broke off from the main branch, and they were somewhat outcast from the rest of the intricate Templaric system of Atlantis. The Elisa was an abbreviation of the word Alisaphane, for which a meaning in modern world languages is difficult to approach. It ascribes to the ancient principle that whatever is removed from one space, so something else must fill that space in return, even if the substance is not visible to the human eye. For instance, if a cup of water is poured into a well, the then empty cup is not truly empty. It not only contains space, it is left with the charge quality of the well into which the water was poured. Further, if a bird looses a feather in mid-flight and it lands upon the earth, that small pinion mirrors the entire bird. Also, the spot of earth where the feather lies is reflected in the bird whose body was once graced by the feather. The meaning of Alisaphane, then, is that of perfect exchange, perfect balance, perfect oneness. For everything that is taken away, something is given, tithed from that source to the quantum field of its former location. Thus, the Temple of Elisa was raised for the purpose of such a tithing. The Elisa priests and priestesses had established a synchronistic contact with a grouping of tribal relationship from Orion, the Pleiades, and Sirius. They called their otherworld counterparts the Onata. We shall call this exchange grouping of both Elisa and Onata the Abacus Maxim. To quote the World Book Encyclopedia, the abacus is, quote, a device used to add and subtract. Beads or balls strung on wires in a frame represent numbers. Each wire of beads on an abacus corresponds to one column of figures in written numerals. In the abacus, the beads strung on the extreme right wire represent numbers 1 to 9. The beads in this row above the horizontal bar count 5 each, and those below this bar count 1 each. Beads in the next row represent tens, 10 to 99. Those below the bar, 10 each, and those above it, 50. The third row from the right represents hundreds, and the next row thousands, and so on. To add on the abacus, beads are moved toward the horizontal bar. End of quotes. Now picture the 9 Elisa as beads below the horizontal bar. In the extreme right column, above the horizontal bar, in that same column, see the Onata. There is established an alignment of energy between these specific individuals. Those below the bar carry the plus charge, and those above carrying the minus factor. Through the accumulative will of these participating individuals, a reciprocity is developed which brings forth a charge of commonality within the horizontal bar. The horizontal bar, or factor, then, acts as a battery that is receiving both positive and negative charges. Were these two very extreme charges to attempt bonding without the bar or zero factor between them, they would destroy one another in a burst of antimatter, as a matter reversal would occur at the point of enjoyment. Whenever 2 or more parallel matter universes come together, they must discharge their mechanism or bonding principle, creating an inrush of opposite charge or phantom lock, which is the conversion of electrons into positrons, antimatter, faster then the mind or central reactive mode of the atom can recognize the release. Thus, a phantom image, or energy, remains of the electrons after their conversion into antimatter. This causes the mind of the atom to collide its matter form with its own phantom barriers. Ironically, this is much like the mind of mankind colliding with barriers of its own cerebral consciousness, which are phantoms of a removed reality, one no longer in the realm of the fast-changing future perspective. Back to the abacus scenario, we see the Elisa and the Onata creating their own etheric bonding, their own mini-universe, an amalgam of both worlds, using the horizontal bar as the point of commonality. It is a safe register that is neutral to either force's mindset. Once the commonality is established, an Alisaphane exchange of the highest order begins to take place. The Onata, having access to the power field of the Elisa, transfer a portion of their light or power to the Elisa. The Elisa must seek balance with this new energy, thus they give to the Onata an energy from their state of being. In order to accomplish this entire exchange, the sentient forms on both sides of the horizontal bar must work as units of specific quantum registers. There must always be more Elisa in the unit than there are Onata in order for the balance to be met. For 9 Elisa, there is 5 Onata. This exchange must be doubled in the next sequence. There must be 14 Elisa and 10 Onata. As the sequences progress, there are certain other processes which we will not explain at this time in order to maintain as simple a format for you as possible. But this light transport does arrive at a 0 factor where a reversal is triggered, at which time this energy exchange begins to manifest on a physical level on the plus side of the bar. In accomplishing the full game or program of Abacus Maxim, the Elisa and Onata hoped to bring into the Earth's continuum large amounts of pure state energy, spiritual yet powerfully dynamic energy, to infuse the planet for a more advanced life wave, closer to its original threshold. In Egypt, under Thoth-Rasmus, more work was done with the Onata as these same souls regrouped with full memory of their past efforts. In the Valley of the Blue Star, which is a slightly removed dimension in the Himalayas, there is a similar frequency to the 0 factor, where many different frequency beings may share their commonality in a physical etheric experience. In attuning to that latitude in consciousness, one may abide with the currents of communion that make such interconnectedness as Abacus Maxim viable in the past, present, and future. That which allows this transfer of the Alisaphane, the thought or in-breath, out-breath that carries all energy exchanges, is the somis. The Onata master who coordinates the Abacus Maximum is identified as Num Somis, he who represents the somis. For use as a meditative contact point, see yourself and your light-minded companions in a starship racing toward a sphere of common bonding in which your radiant counterparts await you. Know that the more advanced actual starship vehicles are powered by cumulative psionic power of its occupants. See yourself and your companions experiencing the rushing of united senses soaring through you and the ship as one, causing the manifestation of speed, flight, dimensional expansion to implode your senses as a streaking rainbow of brilliant color and life. The momentum of spirit engaging flesh, contacting and accelerating electricity within the atoms of being, is that coming of age for the earthbound, when they break free from the infrequent rumblings of distant fortunes and penetrate the whirlwind. I was reading to you from something I wrote and received in the 1980s. Now in 2023, let us dive deeper and see how it relates to us in this current time frame. The first thing I wanted to look at was in the original transmission. It was saying, you don't need to know all of this process. We're just telling you the simpler version, which wasn't all that simple. But what I really wanted to know was, you can't just keep adding people forever, to create this combination. And how does that work? If someone wanted to do it now, how would that apply? So what I'm receiving now is that technically you could go on forever. In other words, the system itself accommodates infinity, which is pretty mind-blowing. However, it's not very practical. So he is saying that how they approached it in the Atlantean days with the Elisa is that they did this to a certain cutoff point, and then they reconnected back to the beginning again. I'm not exactly sure how they did this, but they would transfer the energy, the Elisa exchange. They would transfer the energy they had built up to that point and recycle it in a way back into a beginning point again. And every time they did that, they gained more light focus. There's another term that Thoth used years ago called light transport, and he's bringing that back to me now. It's a light transport. Now, this doesn't mean that that energy is building and building and building until it's like nuclear or something. That's not the kind of energy we're speaking of here. We're talking about light quantum frequency. And light quantum frequency, although it can grow to ad infinitum, what it does is it dimensionalizes. It doesn't just go in a straight line like the energy we create so that you get so much power, it just blows up the universe or something. This is different. It is dimensionalizing the frequency. So that means that it goes through the quantum field and creates more and more the accommodation of the light transport. And as this occurs, everything expands in the awareness factor. Evolution, consciousness, experience of deeper knowledge and wisdom, all the things that we understand in our terminology, is deepened, and a greater focus and coherency comes about. Heart coherency. All these things are wrapped up in the acceleration of this light transport. So what the Elisa were doing with their Onada counterpart was to expand this frequency. And because the Onada were on a higher dimensional field, they could insert their absolute 0 point into the absolute 0 point of our realm. And where those two zeros met in the horizontal bar, there was an attraction of fields. And it developed into a greater and greater response. And thus this back and forth exchange took place, building and developing greater potential and dynamism between these two fields of consciousness.